The unfair treatment of Christians is on the rise in America and beyond.
There's persecution, and there's persecution.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you, Mark Willie. I too would like to welcome you to this edition of the American Religious Town Hall meeting. We're so very glad you've joined us. If this happens to be your first experience here at the Town Hall, a very special welcome to you. We're glad that you've joined us. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like for you to meet our panelists. Let's ask them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
My name is Bishop Michael Olson, and I am the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth.
I am Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
Hello, I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the Senior Pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
I'm James Winegardner, and I serve a congregation of Seventh-day Adventist people in Keene, Texas.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas, which is affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Glad to have you here. And Dr. Winegardner, I understand you have a JD. That's kind of an interesting thing, too. But you're here for the first time on this program. A special welcome to you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, if you would, please.
I'm a person who's born in San Antonio and raised there and is a Seventh-day Adventist. And I went to Southwestern Adventist University in Keene, Texas. And then I have served all over the church for many years, 25 of which I served as a lawyer.
As a lawyer. So you do have a JD, Doctor
Yes.
of Jurisprudence, as they say.
And been a practicing trial lawyer for 25 years.
Well, that's an interesting combination.
Yeah.
Glad to have you here today
Thank
with
you.
us on today's program. Now, let's get started with our program today, shall we? George Yancey, a sociologist and a sociological professor at Baylor University, addresses the question of whether there is really anti-Christian discrimination in America. Are people who spent decades pushing and promoting tolerance now guilty of having intolerance for Christians and other religious groups? In his book, Hostile Environment, Understanding and Responding to Anti-Christian Bias, Yancey uses the term Christianphobia that is defined as an unreasonable hatred or anger toward Christians. He states that his research indicates that these negative emotions are generally directed at Christians with a conservative theological or political perspective. In another book by Yancey titled So Many Christians, So Few Lions, great title, he states that about 32% of all Americans like conservative Christians significantly less than other social groups. In comparison, about 31% of all Americans like Muslims significantly less than other social groups. So it's fair to say, I think, according to Yancey, that if we're concerned about anti-Muslim prejudice, then we should also be concerned about anti-Christian prejudice. Yancey's research also explored the nature of those who exhibit Christianophobia. One responder who does not like Christians writes this: I am only too well aware of their horrific attitudes and beliefs, and those are enough to make me see them as subhuman. Yancey probes whether they just feel mild disgust or whether it is something more serious as irrational hatred that can lead to discrimination and dehumanization. Then Yancey gives us something else to think about. He asks if it is possible that values of tolerance and fairness among secular progressives will inhibit their willingness to mistreat Christians. We're asking our panelists today to respond to at least these questions on this subject. First of all, do you notice a rise of Christianophobia in society? Another question, have Christians contributed to the fear and possibly hatred toward them? If so, what can be done to correct it? And if not, where does the hostility come from? And then finally, when religious organizations are expected to approve the beliefs and actions of all persons and accept all viewpoints as valid, is this really tolerance? Are there scriptures that shed light on this question? That is our subject for today, a very timely one, I should say. Let's go back to those who helped to begin the program by making opening statements. And for that, we go back to Dr. Matthews first. Thank you. More thoughts on the subject?
Yes, I think this is a great topic. It's a cool term, Christianphobia, but it is one that is real. In fact, Dr. Yancey, who authored several books, as the moderator mentioned, he is a sociologist and a pretty solid believer. He writes that when the term Christianphobia is used, it's not just a bunch of Christians who are whining about unfair treatment. He points to the fact that it's more of a emotional attitude, a negative emotional attitude towards Christians, in particular Christians who are conservative. And I was reading an article in Christianity Today titled, "Half of Americans Say Evangelicals Are Discriminated Against." In this article, it posits that 50% of U.S. adults agree that evangelicals are subject to discrimination, and that is up from 42% since 2016. The same article did some research, and it states that 1 in 5, which is 18%, say that evangelicals, which is about a quarter of our population, face a lot of discrimination. And I think the key is, for those of us in the Christian community, we hear stories, we read articles, we know people, certainly in the United States and outside of the United States, Africa, other countries, where Christians are certainly being persecuted. And the apparent hatred, animosity toward Christians is certainly on the rise. One final thing before our other panelists come in. Yancey had, in addition to this question, he asked another follow-up question in one of the articles that was directed to those who do not like Christians. And basically, some of the respondents were saying that they didn't mind if Christians were killed. This is in America. One said that I would be giddy, certainly grateful if everyone who saw himself or herself in that category were snatched permanently from our society, whether by the Holocaust or by a plague. These are human beings, Americans, who are making such statements in our country about Christians, and in particular conservative Christians.
All right, thank you very much for helping to start the program. You also, Dr. Robeck, made an opening statement. More thoughts from you, please.
Yes. You know, religious freedom is something that we share with all religions in this country, and I think it's really important for us to keep that in mind when we talk about persecution of Christians and so forth. There are places in the world, as you noted, there are many places in the world where there's real persecution of Christians. You know, it's a life and death thing. You know, you can think of Pakistan, you can think about the Sudan, you can think about Nigeria, north and south, you can think about many countries in the Middle East where Christianity is not tolerated. You can think about China, where it's a highly controlled state church, or you're in trouble in many respects. I mean, these house churches face a great deal of persecution and so forth, church burnings and so forth. Here in the States, it's far less clear that that's what's going on. I do think, however, that there is an attitude that runs through a lot of people, and I would say on the more liberal side of the spectrum, I would say against more conservative side of the spectrum, there is this wish that we would go away. I'm more conservative. There's a wish that we would change our minds. There's a wish that we would become more tolerant, and so forth. My sense, as I read Scripture, I think about the book of Judges, where everybody did what was right in his own sight. And there's a sense in which I look at the situation in America today and I think, we're not all that far from there. And that's when God brought the judges in to set things right and say, yeah, there is right and wrong, and there are things that we need to do, and there are things that we shouldn't do. But the other thing is that when Jesus talked to his disciples, and I think that through them he talks to us, he said, in this world you face persecution. That's a given. I expect that, okay? Now, as a Christian, as a conservative Christian, I don't face that every day. I don't face that very often at all. Every once in a while, somebody will say something snide or whatever. But at the same time, I have to say, conservative Christians often bring it on themselves, you know? We do respond to things with strident complaints. We are very loud and we're very pushy on that. There is a sense in which, if you look, for instance, at the current administration, who has surrounded himself with a lot of conservatives, there seems to be a lack of compassion. That is certainly not something that I want to say is really Christian. Conservatives, liberals, doesn't matter where you are. And then there are those among us who really are making sectarian demands. You know, if those who want toleration are making demands on us, we are making equally hard, sometimes harsher demands on them. So I think it's a balancing act, and I think we need to respect whoever it is that is speaking against us and working against us, recognizing that religious freedom is something that is a gracious gift given to us by the Constitution, but something that we always need to be very careful about protecting for all religions.
All right, thank you very much. And Pastor Winegardner, again, welcome to the program. I'd like to hear your take on the subject, please.
Well, I think first we have to keep it in context. In North America right now, the concept of hatred or prejudice against Christians, while it's there, we really need to keep it in context. It is nothing compared to what African Americans and people of diverse sexual orientations have been facing. And so let's be real honest that what we're talking about does sound, sorry, Tony, a little bit like whining. And so the big issue for me is this. Jesus told us, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. We're supposed to expect this. This is part of what we're being prepared and trained for. And so we are not to be surprised. I don't know if we can whine or not, but we're not to be surprised. Should we be hated? I hope that we're hated because our behavior convicts others. Our good behavior is convicting to the conscience of others. I believe that's what the Bible teaches, that it should be, that Jesus' good behavior convicted the Pharisees. And so if that's why we're hated, but just as you said, Mel, we've got to be really careful that we're not hated because we're ugly, nasty, prejudiced people. If we as Christians become judgmental, nasty, ugly people, we deserve to be hated. So for me, it's a matter of culture and politics and all the rest, but for me, I am willing to be hated for Christ's sake, as long as it's because my behavior is kingdom behavior and the world recognizes it's not living up to the love and forgiveness that Jesus has instructed me to give.
All right, thank you very much, Pastor. Now I'll come over to Bishop. Bishop Olson, your take on the subject, please.
I think it's a very good topic. I think this can be said in a sociological way, it can be said in a theological way, and I think it can be said in a reasonable way as well. Sociologically, I think sometimes Christians identify more as in their religion as a political party. And their religion becomes sort of a vehicle for partisanship. It's hard to ascertain a lot of times, but I think the best way to do so is to assess it by what's their coherent worldview on it, and which leads to the second point. I do think there is a bias in the media, certainly, against just a coherent worldview that involves right reason. In the contemporary world, there's so much emphasis today in postmodernity on narrative that really the story is much more important. An individual story is much more important than any sort of objective measurement by which people can judge or ascertain how to live a life and how to live a life in community. And I think it's becoming harder to foster a sense of the common good that way. I do think there is a bias, I think, towards an objective frame of morality today. And sometimes conscience, these decisions that are sort of based on conscience really is when conscience becomes a license to do whatever I want to do, and it's sort of, well, I'll claim this is my conscience telling me to do it, and therefore you can't challenge my objective morality, the way I'm living my moral life, and I think that's just incoherent.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go down table to Canon Peterson. Your thoughts, please.
Yes. I certainly agree with my colleagues the last three who've spoken, that I would certainly want to argue that any type of Christianophobia in this country is radically different than what we see in many nations of the world that Mel described. Certainly I would underline Nigeria, much of Africa, and Pakistan, or the countries that you mentioned. I think that that's truly the case. I think that the research of Yancey, I would not argue with his research, but I also believe that in the moderator's statement, he's absolutely accurate for saying the Christianophobia is generally directed at those people of a particular political party, or as he described it, as a theological or political perspective. And I'm not debating his research or anything of the statistics that you mentioned at all, but I'm wondering really whether or not Yancey is really describing a Christianophobia, or if he's describing a church that has drunk the Kool-Aid of a political or social agenda. And I'm wondering if that is not really what he is describing. And I say that thinking in particular another person who's written books on Christianophobia, and that's Robert Short, who really describes what Christianophobia is outside of the United States, and what we see in many of the different countries around the world. For example, in northern Nigeria, where Christians every single day are under the sword.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Trovall, I'd like to hear your perspective, please.
The more I reflect on this, I do think that, as you mentioned, Michael, about the politics and religion being so tightly connected together in people's framework, because politics makes a claim of a certain moral status about how the world is and how it should be changed. Religion does the same thing, and I think those get associated. I have experiences on both sides. I've been Republican and I've been a Democrat. And I have walked into churches where there is a disdain for a particular political figure of a political stripe. And I'm sitting there, I'm in Bible study. Why are we talking about this in Bible study? This is not, and then I'm put off because of what's going on. Liberal, conservative, whatever it is. And I think that this is part of what the issue is that you've all tapped into already, that what this is, it's guilt by association. And Christians themselves have sometimes made way too explicit their own particular moral views and the moral views of a party, and that's where the issue is. I think the other piece is this, I don't know what's going on here, but to me, ad hominem attacks are just terrible all the way around. I don't care who it is, and I hear it on every side by every religion. I've met Christians who have such animosity towards atheists, and I go, have you ever talked to one? I mean, or vice versa, and I just don't understand. I guess I do understand it because it's human nature, because we're scared. And judge not lest you be judged, love your enemy. There's all kinds of things in Scripture that teach us it's about reaching out and demonstrating a different way of life that then compels the other person to say, oh, boy, I was wrong in my judgment.
Dr. Matthews.
Yes, I think when I read Yancey's report, I don't think it's a matter of if persecution is radically different in other countries. We know that. I think the question is it on the rise in America, and what are the implications of the same? And I think that as Christians, we have to be mindful and very aware of the climate. Because if it continues to be on the rise and we don't check it or counter, or if we're browbeated into quietism, the persecution can certainly become greater. And I think that's the sense That's the sense, I think, that of the article.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, we're out of time for this segment. I wish we had more time for it, but we're going to come back for the closing statements, for your summaries. Maybe at that time you can sneak in a few of the points that you didn't get in on this segment. There's an important announcement I'd like for you to listen to. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, Mark. I do look forward to hearing from you. As Mark suggested, you may go to the website. You can see some of the past programs we've archived there for you. Also, learn about the Town Hall Estates, a wonderful organization I think you'd love to become familiar with. We're going to go to our summary statements just now. Let's begin with Bishop Olson. You're first.
I think there is a bias in our society, certainly through our media, that is against not only religion, but a coherent worldview that requires more conversation than simply a soundbite. I think it's incumbent upon us as Christians, as it always has been, to pray for those who persecute us, but also for us to do an examination of our own conscience to see if we are being persecuted for our faith or if our religion is really of a different stripe of partisanship.
All right, thank you for today's participation. And now, Dr. Matthews.
Yes, I love what Peter says in 1 Peter 4. He says, make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in this name. So I think we glorify God in all things, and if persecution or animosity, if it's an uptick towards believers, we glorify God.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Trovall, your summation, please.
I hope that people realize that tolerance and accepting other viewpoints doesn't mean that you accept them. It's that you engage in a discussion about what about my belief might be wrong? What about the other person's belief might be helpful to me that actually might coincide with my own? It's really an attempt to have a deep sense of humility as we engage with other people and their ideas and ask deeply about ourselves and what we believe. I mean, it's really an engagement with, to me, this about humility. And I pray that everyone in this conversation would have a good dose of humility and listen to the other.
Thank you. Good advice. Canon Peterson.
Yes, I wanted to just comment in relationship to the issue of rising tensions. And certainly, if there's Christianophobia in this country, then just imagine the type of Islamophobia that is in this country and what Muslims live with every single day of their life in this nation. And the rise of anti-Semitism is certainly an issue today in this country. And so I don't think it is just simply Christophobia that is on the rise. And whatever the dynamics are in relationship to the political as well as the moral. But certainly we also have to face the fact that we have rising tensions in this country with Islam and certainly anti-Semitism.
Thank you. Pastor Winegardner.
Yes, I just welcome the hatred of whoever hates me, as long as they hate me because I'm like Jesus. The worst thing that could happen to us as Christians if they hated us for good cause because we're hateful people.
Very thought-provoking. Thank you. Dr. Robeck, your summation, please.
Yeah, you know, conservative Christians in particular, I think, are very, very happy to quote John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But they really ought to go on and read the next verse, in which it talks about God did not send his Son, or the Father did not send his Son to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved. And I think there's an awful lot of condemnation that we hear from pulpits in conservative churches, including my own conservative church. And I think there are ways to talk about things that could be useful and helpful. I take a great deal of instruction from the Apostle Paul, especially in 1 Corinthians 13, in those early verses there, where he says, I now show you a more excellent way. So I'm constantly looking for more excellent ways to communicate my concern, my position, the reality that we have as Christians, to share the good things that God has given to us in all of that. I share with you the concern about the rise of anti-Semitism in this country. I really think it's a horrendous thing. I share with you the concern about anti-Muslim phobia as well. But I don't want to take our eye off the fact that there is real discrimination against Christians in this country, and sometimes it's not because they are bad people or that they've said the wrong thing. It's because they hold a position that other people simply will not tolerate. I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you to each one of you for being here today. I think we've learned some things as we've gone around the table. The different perspectives have been refreshing, insightful, educational. We've had some good counsel around this table, and thank you. And I hope you agree as you've watched today's program. Perhaps you've heard something that you hadn't thought of before. And maybe it gives you some opportunity to have discussions with people with whom you don't agree. I think we heard some good counsel here, too, to be vulnerable, to ask questions, to try to understand. You know, that's the whole point of communication, right? To understand and to be understood. And that has to be a two-way street. So I'm hoping that you'll continue to join us from week to week here at the Town Hall. This is how we do it. Around this table, we come from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different religions and points of view. And that's what I think makes this program so successful. For over the last 60 plus years, the program has been on the air, 65 plus actually. So the Lord has continued to bless the Town Hall. And again, I will encourage you to go to the website. You can learn more about the Town Hall estates there. You can also drop us a line. Let us know what you'd like to hear discussed on the program. For now, the Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy, and the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And so now, friends, until next week at the same time, and however you tuned in to watch us today, whether it's this channel or by the internet, the American Religious Town Hall stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.